My name is Michael Deininger. I'm an associate professor. I have to read this, it's new, in the Engineering, Design and Manufacturing Systems section at the Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering here at DTU. And I have the honor and privilege to be your host and chair of this PhD defense this afternoon. To get started, I'll tell you right away, we have some online participants. We will record this session, and I would ask the online participants to please mute, especially during David's presentation, and then also during the official Q&A session. And a reminder for all the participants, because the owl is over there, I think we all need to speak with a vibrant voice here today. All right. First, I would like to welcome our examination committee for today. We have Oksana Mont. Oksana is a professor at the International Institute for Industrial and Environmental Economics at Lund University in Sweden. Welcome, Oksana. Then we have Marco Bertoni. Marco is a professor in mechanical engineering and also the deputy head for the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Blekinge Institute of Technology in Sweden. Marco is also a member of the Design Society and co-chairs the Special Interest Group in Design of Product Service Systems. Befitting. Welcome, Marco.
Thank you very much.
And then we have Thomas Howard here, who is a professor. He's the Novo Nordisk Endowed Chair for Tech Entrepreneurship and Design Science. Tom is also the head of innovation and group leader of technology, entrepreneurship, and design at the Center for Technology Entrepreneurship at DTU. And last but not least, Tom is our chairman of the examination committee for David's defense here today. Welcome, Tom. And then, of course, I would like to welcome the most important person of the day, our PhD candidate, David Sarancic. Super, welcome, David. Then I would like to welcome David's supervisors. We have Tim McAloon. Tim is a professor and also the head of design for sustainability section at the Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering here at the Technical University of Denmark. And I also welcome Daniela Pigoso. Daniela is an associate professor in the design for sustainability section at the Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering at DTU. And finally, a warm welcome to our audience here personally in presence and our participants online. Welcome all. Good, now to the formalities. So during the PhD defense, the candidate David will give a lecture titled Early Stage Design of Sustainable Product Service Systems for Sustainability, Framing a Generic Process for Capital Goods and Manufacturing Companies. This is also the title of David's PhD thesis. David conducted his PhD studies in the section of Design for Sustainability at the Department of Civil and Mechanical Engineering at DTU. His research was conducted in close collaboration with the primary case company Oslo, which is a machinery manufacturing company in the food processing industry. David's PhD study is situated within the PhD program of Civil Engineering, Management Engineering, Mechanical Engineering, and Wind Energy at DTU. David's thesis is paper-based, meaning that the research contributions are presented through various papers. In 5 papers, David focused on product service systems and the potential to decouple economic growth and value creation from resource consumption. The purpose of David's thesis overall is to summarize and connect these research results. After David's lecture, which is scheduled to last 45 minutes, we will take a 10-minute break before the examination committee has time to ask David questions. If you are planning to leave, please plan to do that after the 45-minute presentation, so not to interrupt David. After the committee is done asking David questions, the supervisors may ask questions, and lastly, the audience is welcome to ask questions if we have time left. If you would like to ask David a question, please inform me of that during the 10-minute break. Come up and see me. And the same goes for the online audience. If you have any questions for David, please submit them in the chat during the break and we'll monitor that. In total, the PhD defense may last no more than 3 hours. So we will be done at 4 o'clock. That's all I have for now, David. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Tom, Oksana, and Marco, and everyone else here for being here. And good afternoon to all of you. So in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to present my research in the early stage design of product service systems for sustainability, which led me to frame a generic process for capital goods manufacturing companies. I have to say that this research was co-financed in the context of MADE, which is the Manufacturing Academy of Denmark, a consortium of Danish universities, manufacturing companies, and research institutes that all work together to elevate Danish manufacturing. When I started preparing for this presentation, I spent quite a lot of time selecting a proper picture that would do the justice for the cover page. And I think Tim, my main supervisor, can attest to that as well. I wanted to be green. I wanted to show something circular, but above all, I wanted it to show the world that we want to continue living in. I could have also shown this kind of a thing. And this could be a world that we are heading to with our current production and consumption patterns. This is the world that we want to prevent. And this is the world that we want to prevent by thinking differently, by employing different business models within the scope of the circular economy. And the main enabler of the circular economy here are product service systems. So let me now tell you in the 4 sections of my presentation how these product service systems can actually help us remain having the world in the first picture and how we can design and develop those kinds of offerings. So to start off with the introduction, I would first like to tell you what is the main objective, what are the main research questions and the research gaps that I'm trying to address in my research. But first, let's start a little bit deeper into the motivation and the context that this research is placed in. So to have a holistic view on how do we come to even talk about PSS in industry and in academia, it's really nice to look at how did we as the mankind develop through different economic stages throughout the years, starting from the pre-industrial economies and going further into industrial economies, and then in today's service economies. We as a mankind have been super good at always growing economically, increasing our GDPs, standards of living, and so on. But we haven't been so good in thinking about different production and consumption patterns and the environmental impact that our economic growth implies. But in recent years, both due to awareness and different technology development, we now for the first time have a really solid opportunity to decouple those two lines and actually continue growing economically and producing value without making as much environmental impact. And this is really the thinking behind the circular economy and behind the product service systems, which can help us to deliver value to different companies and customers through services that are not material intensive, so that we do not have to produce more products, but still deliver value to customers through services. And this kind of a shift in paradigm has been recognized as well by MADE, Manufacturing Denmark, and researched mostly within the scope of the workstream 1 there, where we have ASTED as one of the participants in this workstream, and as one of the main case companies that I was studying in this research. So ASTED is more than 100-year-old company, family-owned company, almost 400 employees, many patents, and it operates in many countries around the world. And here you can see some of the products or the machines, the lines such as a bakery line, chocolate tempering machine, or a molding line that would produce a Kit Kat chocolate, for example, at the end. So those are the products that ASTED makes. And you can see that ASTED is present in different businesses, in chocolate, confectionery, and bakery. But there is also some revenue coming from the after-sales services here. This is the total revenue, 576 million in 22, I can say that this year is much better. So what ASTED wanted to do is develop PSS, product service systems, because it suited the strategy that was established 3 years ago. The strategy that had several moonshots to grow the cake, to earn more, but also to reduce CO2 emission and energy consumption in the entire value chain by half by 2030. So how can we achieve growth and at the same time reduce emissions? Well, you know, it's by using product service systems. So at ASTED, we really want to grow this cake and then also have 50% of our profit coming from services in every year to come until 2030. So now that you know that PSS is quite important and the impact that it might have, I would like to define what it actually is. PSS is a combination of tangible products and intangible services that are supported by the network of actors and the infrastructure, all designed together so they can deliver more sustainable value than traditional product sales, traditional offerings. Product service systems can be many things depending on the mixture of product and service content in it. But what we know is that the more service content we have in the mix, the more service-based value we deliver to the customers, there's a higher sustainability potential and a higher potential to decouple value creation from resource consumption. PSS can have many types, and I'd like to show just a few to know what are we exactly talking about here. We can split them according to different types of criteria. The first one being product ownership. So if we have a customer that is the owner of the product after the product is being sold, so like it is today when the product is sold, we can add value to that product with material-driven services or data-driven services. And here we are talking about product-related product service systems. This could be an inspection or a maintenance contract added on top of machinery. Then we have advice or consultancy. We could advise a customer to optimize the machine, for example, together with the product being sold. If we, on the other hand, have product ownership retained by the provider, by the manufacturer, we are still looking at different ways that this product can fulfill the function. So it can be fulfilled by the user or by the provider. If it's by the user, we are looking at different time frames that the product can be accessed by the customer. And if it's medium or long, we are talking about leasing or use-oriented product service systems. And if it's short, we are talking about the exclusivity of the access to that product. If it's not exclusive, then we are talking about product pooling. And if it is, then we are talking about either renting or sharing, depending whether they have a pre-booking option. And then finally, if you go all the way back to function being fulfilled by the provider, we can deliver the value to the customer in 3 different ways: activity, count, or result-based. And here we have the 3 final types of results-oriented product service systems, where we could, for example, outsource supply management for the customers, as we would have in this example, or the customer could pay us per the kilo of produced chocolate, as we would have in this example, or we could deliver a set performance to the customer and charge the customer according to the performance that we deliver to the customer. If we shuffle those around, we will get the well-known Tucker model, which is the most widely used model in PSS literature to represent the different types of product service systems. No matter the type we choose that we want to deliver to the market, they all need to be somehow designed. And when we think about design, we can think about design in terms of products. If we have to design a product, we are talking about planning the tasks, having conceptual design, embodiment design, and detailed design. What we are focusing on in this thesis is the early stage design of product service system, meaning those two first phases. And there are 2 reasons why we are focusing on the early stage design in those phases. The first one being is that we lack the most of knowledge for the early stage design, because it is the most difficult to make informed decisions when we have just qualitative or scarce data here. And the second reason is that this early stage PSS design is actually the most impactful of the other stages, because decisions that we make here are going to be difficult to alter in the embodiment and detail design, and they could impact up to 80% of the environmental impact and financial impact that the product will later on have when it reaches the market and evolves from a concept that was developed here. So we are focusing on the early stage design, and we are also focusing on a subset of companies those are the capital goods manufacturing companies, the companies that produce machinery. And they have some specifics. Why are they different from manufacturing companies, for example, in B2B sector? Here we are focusing in B2C, apologies. So here we are focusing on B2B business models where we have high value investment goods, where we have prolonged sales relationships, when we have few key accounts really influencing the way that we develop our products, so making this sales process of capital goods really special. And therefore, by addressing these complexities in B2B market, we are also managing to address some of the complexity in other markets, since this one is being the most complicated. So as I said, it's early stage design and it's capital goods manufacturing companies, and we are studying it from a theoretical perspective, the academic view, but also empirical, because I've been involved in manufacturing company as well. So when we put all of that together, we could say that the overarching objective of this research is then to develop a systemized framework to support managers an early stage PSS design for sustainability in capital goods manufacturing companies. And how do we go about that? Well, I went through a lot of literature to identify many different gaps and opportunities to build up that systematic framework. And I figured there are 4 primary gaps that needs to be addressed in order to be able to deliver this systemized framework. The first one being drivers and barriers, gap A. We need to really be sharp on the motivation that we have to develop PSS, but also the challenges that we might come across when we are developing it. Then second, there is a process that is lacking in the literature to design the early stage of product service systems. And what is missing here is a step-by-step guide, but also a reference model where we could draw all of our knowledge from to design product service systems in the early stage. Then what is missing are the instantiation guidelines, meaning the guidelines that can help us use these academically developed tools into practical applications in the context of industrial companies, where we could actually make more impact with the methods developed in academia here. And then finally, there is a lack of sustainability screening tools for PSS concepts in the early stage of PSS design. So what we are trying to do here is really judge what is the sustainability potential the different PSS concepts coming out of this generic process model have when they reach the market as a physical offering later on. And all those 4 gaps are connected to the 4 main questions. So the first one being about drivers and barriers, the second one being about having a generic process model to develop product service system, the third one being about enabling the application of this generic process in practice, and the fourth one being about sustainability screening for PSS concepts. And all of those questions have sub-questions to further detail what we are actually looking for. So now that you know what we are looking for, I would like to tell you how did I go about answering those questions in a way that you can trust it, in a rigorous way that you can trust it. So I've used the design research methodology. It is a methodology consisting out of 4 stages: research qualification, descriptive study 1, prescriptive study, and descriptive study 2. So it is a process, it is a methodology that can be used to develop research, but it should not be looked as a stepwise model. It should be looked at more as an iterative method and a cyclical method that we can use multiple times and go multiple rounds through it to find the answers to the research questions that we are willing to find. So if we start from the top, talk about research qualification. In the research qualification, we are really searching for everything that I've just presented in this presentation so far. So we are searching to define what is the objective, what are the research questions, and what are the gaps. In short, to formulate what is the goal of this research that we are trying to do. In descriptive study 1, we are really diving deeper in the phenomenon that we are studying. We are really trying to develop the understanding of what is missing and where I could contribute with my research to develop support for design that can enable, in this case, early stage design of product service systems. In prescriptive study, it is the time to employ creativity as well to develop these design supports, which could be either the screening tool, the generic process model, or the guidelines in this case. And then finally, in the fourth stage, descriptive study 2, it is all about the evaluation. It is about evaluating those tools developed in the previous step with respect to their usability and usefulness, and whether they're actually covering the gaps that we've identified in the beginning of the model. So in the context of this research, I've used research qualification to find drivers and barriers, and then I've used 3 cycles of the remainder of the DRM methodology to first, in cycle 1, develop the generic process model, and then evaluate it in cycle 2 to develop the instantiation guidelines, and then in cycle 3 to develop the screening tool. And those correspond to the gaps A from D that I've described just a little while ago. So the research clarification really tackles the drivers and barriers, and the research question 1, the cycle 1 tackles studying the existing PSS design approaches, then development of the generic process model and its evaluation. Then we have the instantiation guidelines and research questions 3 answered in cycle 2, and the guidelines that are developed here. Here we don't have a DS2 study, the evaluation study, because those were evaluated at the same time as they were being developed in the companies. And then we have cycle 3, and this is all about the sustainability screening tool development, and then finally evaluation. So in order to answer all of those questions and to leave no stones unturned, to approach them from many angles and be sure that we've actually explored everything that needs to be explored, I've used a number of research methods to tackle these problems, starting from the literature review all the way to action research, interviews, case studies, expert validation, and so on. And here you can see which of these methods were used with regard to what research questions, so they could be answered in the best possible way. Now, all of this research had to be somehow documented and disseminated. So I mapped here which of the papers actually contain answers to which research questions and where were these research methods used. So the first paper that is appended in the thesis is tackling this first one, drivers and barriers, that you can see up here. The second paper is covering this research question. The third paper is covering this one. The fourth is about the screening tool. The fifth, the final one appended in the thesis about evaluating this screening tool. And then we have a number of papers that were not included in the thesis, but are available at request. And then if we map it back to the already familiar representation, here you can see mapped those papers together with all the gaps and how do they answer different parts of the model. Right, so let's now dive a little bit deeper into what are those results and reflections with respect to every research question and every research gap A to D. So starting again from the familiar model here and diving deeper into the drivers and barriers. So the first study was conducted both empirically in the manufacturing company, but also through literature reviews to identify different barriers and drivers for the implementation of PSS. And I've identified 45 barriers in total and 37 drivers in total. And what we also saw is a distinct pattern when we try to distinguish those drivers with various to their level, whether they're strategic, tactical, or operational. So if we would dive deeper to exemplify them a bit, some of the drivers on strategic level were to be more triple bottom line sustainable. So this is the main driver in most of the cases, whether is it to have a more stable recurring income stream from the economic perspective, whether is it to extend product life and make it more efficient from the planet perspective, or is it just securing more intensive jobs and having building better trust with customer from a social perspective. From tactical drivers, one of the main ones was to increase the overall equipment effectiveness as the golden standard in the manufacturing industry to measure goodness of machinery. And that means to increase its availability, the level of performance, or the quality of its outputs. And the operational level driver is to just plainly learn more about where their parts and how are they actually behaving and when do we have to switch them and so on. From barrier perspective, it is really challenging. It was considering this study really challenging to actually define the impact that PSS has on sustainability. So it is the motivation is that the PSS would bring a triple bottom line benefit, but it's really challenging to actually quantify and see how does it impact the triple bottom line sustainability. From a tactical perspective, there is a strong barrier to understand the actual customer needs with PSS and how the machines that you saw in the picture earlier are being used, because we historically haven't had any data at the company on how the customers behave around machines and with the machines when they are operating properly, only when something goes very wrong and then the customers call. And then on the operational level, it can be really challenging, for example, to collect and analyze customer and machine data just from a simple reason that they are not willing to share it. And then we are not able to make nice informed decisions about how to deliver and when to deliver what kind of service. That was briefly about the gap A. And let's now dive into gap B, the generic process model. And I must say, this is one of the biggest contribution of the thesis here. So I'm going to build it up layer by layer and describe how this model came into place. So first, this model has been built on the basis of a systematic literature review that took in 96 different papers and approaches to first devise a time dimension of the model, in which we have 3 different phases of design and 4 main gates, in which we make go or no-go decisions to go to the further stage or not. Then we have a quantum dimension, which are all the matters that need to be considered when designing PSS in early stages, starting from the business model, network of actors, and all the way down there to structure and plan for implementation. If we were to double-click on any of these clusters, we would have a number of entities that need to be designed within the cluster. So, for example, in the business model, we need to determine the value proposition. We need to determine the way that we earn money. We need to map the user activity cycles, and so many different things here if you double-click. Then we know that there are a number of activities that we need to go through in order to be able to design any of those entities within the clusters. So we need to identify who are our possible partners. We need to analyze the relationships, define how they should look, select them, and then refine those relationship and partnerships as we go in this cluster. Then the next layer is about determining what activity should be conducted in which phase and where should the most of the attention be put in every phase. So if you're talking about the business model, you can see that a lot of focus should be put on designing a business model in the early stages, and the same is true for the network of actor. In the second phase, it's more about requirements and function, and in the third one, it is about determining what are the exact service options and exact products that can fulfill the function defined here. What is the supporting structure in terms of facilities or in terms of IT infrastructure needed to support the service delivery? And then the last one, it's more about planning ahead for the detailed and embodiment design, assigning responsibilities, defining KPIs for PSS projects, and so on. Another layer is the IDF0 notation or the icon notation. This one, if we were to double click on it, would basically tell us I and O, input and output of all the information coming in each of the phases, and that needs to go to the next gate in the output. And it would also tell us C and M, constraints and mechanism. For example, a constraint in this network could be that we don't want to have partners from certain parts of the world, for example, from Russia. And then the mechanisms are all the tools that we can use in these phases that can help us generate the output. So it could be a business model canvas, value proposition canvas, ecosystem map, and any different tools that can help us in those clusters to reach the outputs. Then there is another layer here talking about different product types. So this is really about selecting which parts or which stages of the process model are necessary based on the complexity of the project that you're developing. So if you are developing a PSS for a new market, you're also using new technology, it is a radical design process. You need to use the whole model. If it's just one of those two, so just new technology or not new customer segment, then you use just the last two. If it's incremental, you want to change service delivery process or tweak it minorly, you can use the last one. And this layer is more of a reminder that even though you can see them in different tracks, those clusters and in different phases, it is a reminder that this should be an iterative cyclical process because it never goes straight. It is put in a stage gate model because that's what the practitioners are used to, and it is a useful way to get to the end of the process in a time that's reasonable and not going cyclical many times. Not least, another layer that is about sustainability considerations. So this should be treated as the integral parts of the model. And this is where we, for the first time in these kind of process models, actually determine what kind of sustainability considerations should be taken into account with respect to every phase and with respect to every cluster, so that we can consider sustainability in every portion of the model and not just wait to evaluate what is going on after we already have the concept, and that we really embed different principles and use different tools that can help us have a concept with more sustainability potential in the end. Now here comes a part that I think is the most interesting. This is something that has not been included in the thesis, but this is a representation of how it looks when you use this kind of a model in practice. So if we were to double click on a business model cluster here, we would get the icon notation. What are the input constraints, outputs, and mechanisms? So what are the tools? What should we do in this phase with respect to business model canvas? And this is an example of an analysis that we did in the case company as well. So here we try to map all the customer activities and then customer touch points with ASTED mapped here with those logos. So we here have a pre-phase. This is before they buy the product. Then we have the use phase. This is when the product is being in use. And then we have the post phase. Since it's B2B and it's been historically selling products, it makes perfect sense that we have many touch points here to convince a customer to buy a product and many services in that regard. But this could last for a year. And then there's this phase. This phase could last 20, 25 years because machinery has a very long lifetime. And you can see that we have very few touch points. And that's really such a shame because there are so many opportunities to extend product life, optimize it, but bottom line, to just earn more because you can sell services throughout 25 years and make a strong business case for the company. And there's a pretty much the same story in the post phase there. Then we have another example in the network of actors cluster, kind of the analysis, one kind of the analysis that we did here. So here we mapped one type of one product family and how many machines have been sold in the last 20 years to all the different countries around the world. And this really led us to know where should we actually have our service presence, where should we have our partnerships, and where should we, so in order to be able to deliver on the service quality that we are promising. So we can see here that we sold a lot of machines to the US and Turkey and Brazil and India. So it would probably make sense to have some partnerships there and to have some service engineers there, for example. Disregard this one because this is not valid anymore, but it has historically been a big business for Asted. Then we can perhaps skip the yellow one to save some time. And I think it's really important here to talk about the function and defining a functional unit for different PSS offerings. So here is really about defining what should those products deliver, what should those product service system deliver. So in the case of a tempering machine, it could sound something like this. So we want to deliver 1,000 kilos per hour of tempered chocolate with a tempering index of 5. This is as a measure of quality. And output temperature 27 degrees, 16 hours a day, 300 days a year in Denmark. So this is really the main function that the machine should deliver. And with respect to this function, we can then compare different concepts, different PSS concepts that we are developing with each other and figure out, with respect to this bottom line, how do they perform both financially, but also environmentally. And then there is also a lot of different sub-functions that the customer requires that are not connected to this one. But for example, a machine needs to have a night mode, so it has a saving mode, and this has to be instilled in the machine. Then another example in the offerings, here it's really about defining the products and service options that will fulfill this function. And here I'm giving an example of defining different service level agreements. So here on the left side, you don't have to read it, it's a lot of text, but here you have different service options. And then you also have different service packages that include any of these options. And then you can see, of course, like in a car wash model, the more you pay, the more value you get. But here it's really about defining the different service options that will deliver the function to the customer that we promised. And then just another one about the structure. This one is, among other things, about defining the IT infrastructure needed to support the offerings and to better inform the service. Here we have a picture of a tempering machine's cross-section where we map more than 90 data points to figure out temperatures at different points, to figure out voltages, frequencies, and currents, and so on, in order to be able to make some informed decisions. When should we make this kind of a maintenance, and what part should be changed soon? And then in the final, the pink one, plan for implementation, as I said, it's all about defining roles, responsibilities, KPI, and planning for the future. So there was the B part. In the C part, we are really talking about the instantiation guidelines. And this is really about taking this colorful generic process model and instantiating it, tailoring it to a specific context of a given company. This means tailoring it to different departments, different organizational structure, but also different vocabulary that is used as the company, so that the company can feel it's their own model and use it repeatedly for maximum impact. What I did here is to have 3 participatory case studies with equipment manufacturing companies, and then instantiated the models to their context, and also mapped the actions they did in instantiation and the challenges they encountered in the instantiation, so they can take this model once it's in their company and instantiate it further for every project that they do, because perhaps they do not have to use the full model, but just the different entities and segments of the model that are relevant for them. And this is what we came up with in the end. These are the instantiation guidelines. It is a set of 15 different topics that a company needs to go through and think about it. So think of it as a manual to adopt a generic process model in a company. And just to showcase a few of those points here, not to go through it all. So the first step is to really assemble a cross-functional team that is covering a wide variety of functions in the company, because we we want to have inputs from different parts of the company in order to make the most informed decisions about how this process should look like and who should be involved in it. Because at the end of the day, the complexity of the communication flows in the company would determine the complexity of the system that we can design. Then perhaps it is quite important to introduce pragmatical streamlines and employee and departmental responsibilities to know who should tackle which part of the model. Then, for example, sustainability. It is quite important to treat that final layer of the process model and explicitly tie those considerations into the instantiated process models in the companies so that we know exactly what we are looking for in regards to sustainability in every phase in relation to every cluster. And then perhaps the last one, it is really important to have this PSS champion. It is a process owner. It is a person that is responsible to adjust the process, document it, and institutionalize it over time so that it's being used over and over. And this is an example of how the first instantiated version of the process model looked. It lasted, and here you can see that it is departmental view here, that it has different vocabulary, the one that is being used at the company, but there is also a map with all those colorful boxes there saying, where did we get this knowledge from the generic process model? So this blue B is, we got this knowledge from generic process model business model cluster. And then finally, the D part of the model, it is about screening, sustainability screening tool. And the purpose of this tool is to select the best PSS concept at the end of the generic process model. So no wonder it's called the best PSS, but it actually stands for Business, Environmental, and Social Screening Tool for PSS Concepts. And it is built out of 4 main dimensions. First one being PSS elements. Those are the main PSS elements that determine PSS impact. It is the products, the network, the service, then the infrastructure. Then we have the second dimension. It is the life cycle stages, beginning of life, middle of life, and end of use. Then we have the triple bottom line sustainability here with economic or business layer, environmental layer, and the social layer. So what we end up here is a way to describe a PSS concept with a cube where each of these little dice are representing a benefit or a cost. They represent how valuable are different parts of the concept. And all this to be able to say, what are the hotspots of these concepts? What are the different costs and benefits that really positively or negatively impact this concept? And what can we do to either make it better or to remove those negative hotspots? So in the example of this one, where the arrow points at it, we can see that it's a business layer, we can see it's a beginning of life, and we can see it's a product. So it's probably related if we have a leasing example, we want to lease a product. This could be very costly from a business perspective in the beginning to retain the ownership of that product in the beginning. And it might be necessary to find some partner, bank or financial institutions that can help us finance, because we will get the payments for this product throughout time in the future, and we might not be able to afford to retain the ownership in the beginning. So here we have the complete model here. Now let's jump into the final considerations, and first just connect it back to this model and see how all of these research questions have been answered throughout the presentation as well. So I've listed and exemplified some of the drivers and barriers, and we have them clustered in different strategic, tactical, and operational levels. I've systemized many different perspectives to develop a generic process model, which also has a process and all the necessary reference knowledge, then enable the application of the process model in practice with those instantiation guidelines, and then systemized a tool that can help us screen different concepts at the end of the generic process model. So if it is less schematic, it would look like this. those drivers would be the input to gate A, the Q would be the input to gate D to really judge and assess the different concepts. And then we would have the generic process that can be instantiated or tailored to specific contexts of an individual manufacturing company. So all in all, this research has a number of contributions, both from a scientific and industrial perspective. And here are just a few of those. So let's start with the scientific. So what I think I did is to really systemize and expand decades, 2 or even 3 decades of multidisciplinary research on PSS design into this holistic process, then also enabled structured inclusion of sustainability considerations in every phase and with respect to every cluster that we need to design, and also introduced this concept of having a generic process model that can be customized with the institution guidance. And from the industrial perspective, this has been really important for the company, is to somehow align and be able to say something about how does PSS impact the triple bottom line of the company. Then I've also managed to bridge this discrepancy between academically and industrially applicable design supports, also with instantiation guidelines and how they should be transformed to fit different contexts. And I think in all, just introduced more trust into using academic models in the industry, because we know from the literature that they have not been that well received in the future due to their complexity or any other reason. Of course, this research is not without a few limitations. And I think the first one being is what I just said, this discrepancy between how we measure academic and industrial success of a method. And I've really tried to find a balance there with having a generic model, but which can also be tailored. Then I cannot, of course, claim that this is a fully generalizable framework or the process, because it has been tested only in 3 capital goods manufacturing companies in Denmark and in 3 industries. So it's really hard to say that it works in each case. And then another limitation is even though product service systems and their design are evolving always, the nature of this support is static. It is a process that does not adapt to the new things that we learn, and that is something that should be researched in the future. And then, of course, there's an uncertain relation between the sustainability potential that the concept has at the end of the process and the actual sustainability impact that the offering will have once it turns from the concept into the market. So for this, we will really need to have a longitudinal study. So of course, for future work, it is tested in different contexts, in different B2B and B2C, in different industries, and with different product service system types, meaning product use and result oriented. It is about also adding this dynamic capabilities so that it can be adaptable, but also in a sense that each and every responsible department and individual can only see the part of the model that is relevant to them, not to overwhelm the design of the PSS. And as I said, it's also employing longitudinal studies to measure how does this concept actually perform after 5 years that has been there in the industry. Then it could be possible to expand the models beyond early stages to also include the embodiment and detail design of PSS. And then one of the quite important thing is to focus more on first communication. How do we actually communicate and exchange information between different clusters and between different phases? Because this is in most cases what limits, as I said, the complexity of the system that can be designed and operated, but it is also about digitalization. It is about looking more into smart PSS and how this complexity can be harnessed and added in these models. And this is also something important, something that I'm dealing with now as ASTED employee, is how to create rapidly business cases, not just from a financial perspective, but from a triple bottom line perspective, to judge different concepts, different PSS concepts, to be able to say, this is a good concept, this can go into being deployed into the market, because at the end of the day, if there is not a business case, it will not fly in a company setting. And finally, I would really like to say a big thank you to all the companies and to all the collaborators that I had from all those different institutions, but also thank you to all of you for the attention you've given me. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for an inspiring, engaging presentation. To keep on track, I suggest we take a 8-minute break and be back at 2 o'clock. Reminder, if you want to ask David a question, if we have time afterwards, please bring them to me during the break. So I'll see you again at 2 o'clock. In the same, yeah, for the online people, please put questions in the chat. All right, now it's time for questions. Thank you all for sticking to the timeline. We start with the examination committee, and they have agreed to 2 rounds of questions for David. So we will have 20 minutes per examiner in the first round, and then we'll take another round where each examiner gets another 10 minutes. I have a little time up here to keep our examiners on track, and we agreed to start with Professor Oksana Mott. Oksana,
Thank
it's
you.
all yours.
Great. First of all, David, congratulations on the fantastic piece of work you've done. In 3 years, you've published a lot. You've engaged with many companies on different levels. You plowed through literature. You developed your own toolkit. You even tested it in companies. Many PhDs finish with proposing a framework which is never tested. I guess you met a lot of these frameworks in publications, but you've actually gone into different companies and got them to test what you proposed. So this is fantastic. And we also were facing a very neat book. The text that you've compiled, that is very structured and helped us, the evaluators, to go through and be with you in the process. So well done indeed. So I don't have major drawbacks that I've seen in your work, but of course there are a lot of interesting things I would like to discuss with you. And I would like to start with, I'll sort of go from the macro level to more detailed level. So my first question is actually, you are saying that PSS have been in the kind of backwaters for a while, and now it's coming again to the front line. And I was wondering, why is that? How do you see that it's on the rise in academia, maybe in practice? And why do you think it had this kind of dip and now it's been drawing more interest again?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words and for the question. I think there have been different periods to PSS design over the last 30 years, starting from the 90s and with your early work as well on product service systems, which was primarily environmentally motivated, having better resource effectiveness and similar motivations. Then I sort of went into more of a civilization-driven literature research in 2008-9 with all the groups from the UK. And then we went a little bit into IT and data, 2012, 13, and so on. And then there was a little bit of a down period before circular economy started to be more prevalent in literature. And I think this is exactly what spurred the reemergence of PSS, because in many works that I've had, PSS is seen as the main enabler of circular economy and circular business models. So I would say it is definitely from 2016, 17 and onwards that I could see more and more publications coming from this angle. But also now in 2022, and when I was doing my systematic literature review, a lot of the newer publications exactly were coming from that angle. So although I think we saw not that many, 2015, 2020, now I think it is picking up the pace again. And I hope to contribute to that also with my work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Then you are linking, so you position PSS as an enabler of circularity. And then yet circular economy now is also been criticized. It perhaps doesn't bring the sustainability benefits. It has limited kind of link social sustainability. So then I would like to ask you a kind of strategic question. Is it good to position PSS to link it to circularity, or is it better to link it to sustainability?
Straight onwards, I would say to sustainability. But I see it as, as a sustainability being a much wider concept in circular economy that contains the circular economy in it, and then this one perhaps also then contains PSS. So in an ideal world, I would like the PSS to contribute to circularity, but then at the end also to sustainability. Of course, it's two different concepts. So circular economy and sustainability that shouldn't be mixed, but circularity can definitely contribute to sustainability, although it's not always like that. Also in the PSS examples, if I may, it's in the packaging, food packaging, for example, also in the asset perspective. So if we want to lease out a machine and then take it back to enable circularity at the end of its life cycle, this might sound circular, but it might be less sustainable than not taking it back, because we might have shipped this machine to Australia and needs to bring it back to Denmark. So all this shipping and logistics will introduce much more impact at the end of the day with respect to sustainability. So you could say that it could be circular and not sustainable at the same time. And then definitely, to come back at the beginning of the question, I would say sustainability is the goal, not circularity.
Mm-hmm. I want to jump to even a higher level and leave the actual subject of your study aside a bit and ask you to reflect a little bit on your ontological position. How do you see the world outside? Is there a world outside us? And then reflect in terms of epistemology. Maybe engineers are not familiar with these words, but basically, what is the role of a researcher? If there is a world outside, all we can do is just to watch how it develops and reflect, but we cannot really influence it. If we think kind of more, in a sense, less positivistic, we say, okay, there is a world outside, but we as people in our societies, we do influence what happens. And so, of course, here comes the industry and policy and so on. So we as researchers, then we, on one hand, we need to observe and be kind of away from our subject of study, but then we also want sustainable development. So we really need to delve in and get together with companies and help them on the way. Have you reflected at all on these kind of questions?
I think we should never observe ourselves as this separate from the world, because from the world we came and we'll, of course, go back to it. And I think the role of the researcher is to have that always in mind, that we, with our actions and with our research, are influencing the world, and then vice versa. I think we should not stand aside. And that is one of the main reasons why I actually like this kind of setting of my PhD that I had, where I both have one foot in academia and stand behind and observe the phenomena, and then another foot in the company, where I'm able to practically and perhaps, in a pragmatic way, influence the things we are doing at the company. And hence also those instantiation guidance, if I might bring it back to that, is to really connect the academia to industry, and then make a balance between rigor and relevance that we have in our research for industrial applications, for the biggest impact that we can reach.
Thank you. Then you mentioned in your study that there is the service paradox that some companies experience. They bring more services into the company with the idea to get closer to customers, to potentially improve sustainability, but then they have increased costs for the company. This is how PSS is perceived, and that's also a little bit what we see with your generic model, process model, that it's quite a tedious process to develop it, to get the company to learn the terminology, to learn all the steps, then also translate it into the adapt to their own processes and practices. So how do we solve PSS if it's so damn complicated?
I think above all, there are a number of successful examples, especially even though it's difficult, especially in the capital goods manufacturing industry, starting from Xerox, Tetra Pak, Atlas Copco, Rolls-Royce, and all the different companies that have successfully managed to implement PSS and actually earn money from it. Of course, I have the same thinking without focusing on those operational costs and things that break PSS, the things that we observe in the drivers and barriers in the beginning, the operational barriers that really start to build up and make PSS not work as it should work, like we have in the example 2 weeks ago when Schernau in Copenhagen failed, exactly because of those operational barriers that were not studied in depth in the beginning of the design process. So we could have all the motivation in the world, but if we do not go really in depth and really rigorously with all the barriers that we could encounter, we will inevitably run into this service paradox. Of course, there might be a lucky company or two that face this kind of a thing, but I think that is exactly the value of this kind of models, to have this kind of a rigor and try to foresee all the operational obstacles that will break the financial case for PSS concept.
Thank you. And then I was thinking about reflecting on drivers and barriers for different companies. And with PSS, it's not only the companies, but also you will bring this up, the differences between B2C and B2B companies, and then the profound role that customers or B2B companies have in creating PSS. But it is about the network of actors, supply chain, the value chains. So when we talk about drivers and barriers, are you looking at the drivers for a specific company, for your equipment manufacturer, and how to balance it with the drivers and barriers of the actor network and the supply chains?
So I would say I have two views on this point. First one is coming from the literature, in which I studied not only the capital goods manufacturing companies, but all manufacturing companies and what barriers they have. And then I had one specific case of Asted, the case company, where I went really in depth to identify what are the specific drivers and barriers for them. And I think put together, those can help in general capital goods manufacturing companies. I also hope that it can help manufacturing companies in B2C sector in general, but I think I had a unique opportunity to blend the two, and a unique opportunity to actually dive quite deep in the company on strategic, operational, and tactical levels to see what people on the shop floor even think about the barriers and how they inflict their daily jobs. I hope that answers.
I was thinking actor networks outside of the company, so the customers, but also, the suppliers or the policymakers in this country.
I think it is absolutely relevant to also study the barriers that all network actors have when we want to co-deliver this PSS. In the supply chain, in the case of Asted, it is of utmost importance to think about it in the beginning, because some customers will just want the machine delivered as soon as possible without caring for anything else because it is urgent now. So this is a prohibiting factor for us to go for PSS, because the customers just want it faster and faster. And I think it is the same story for also the financing institution and the partners from that kind of a segment, where if they're not experienced into leasing industrial equipment, they will see it as a big barrier without any experience going into this kind of a model, because they see it as a big risk and they haven't calculated it before. So it could also be difficult to convince partners to go that kind of a way with PSS.
The model works, or you talk about this translation process from what the model determines, and you're very careful not to, or warning to assign what department needs to deal with this, and you suggest that we look at the functions. So what kind of changes the companies need to, what are the most profound changes in capabilities, skills that you've seen among the companies that they needed to develop and they were not completely unprepared for that? The model of the PSS kind of urgent.
I think there's a whole spectrum depending how big the company is and what industry they're in, how they value sustainability, and how they want to prioritize it or not. For smaller companies, it's definitely the lack of capabilities in service design. Some of the smaller companies might not even have after sales or service departments. So acquiring this workforce or acquiring another company that has these capabilities could be a little bit better for them. On the other side, for bigger companies, it is all about communication with them, because if we have a really complicated organizational structure and everyone has to work together and it's different levels of hierarchies, it is virtually impossible to have this kind of a complex model implemented in a company without simplifying it beyond use anymore. So there's just three phases, three boxes that they can then easily track and execute. But then we are losing the most of the knowledge, the most of the intricacies of the model that make it so good because of its rigor. So I think there's a lot of things here.
Also, one thing for me is, okay, when we talk about companies, then we immediately assume that, okay, then the PSS will be implemented in the entire company, in all the product lines and all that. So I guess companies, from what I've seen, companies often work through pilots, or once pilots work, they might establish a small unit, and then which would grow into a daughter company and so on. So have you seen kind of different ways of how companies are working with PSS?
Yeah, I think there's actually a supplementary paper that's not included in the thesis that's talking about pilot projects in PSS that I wrote, but I think there are principally two ways here. The one is to found a new company from the outset that will do with a certain size of the business, not to have a competition in between the two. And the other one, depending on the company size, more or less difficult, is to have it under the same roof. But then comes a lot of challenges. First off, for example, how would the salespeople get their incentive when they sell a product? Is it a commission based on the product they sell, or is it total cost of ownership based commission, where they would get more commission if they sell the service level agreements of the 10 years? So it is shifting the complete paradigm on how does the company work. And I think instilling a PSS design process in the company really means developing the company as a whole, for it to be able to host this kind of a model in all the different departments.
Thank you. Let's see if I will manage with two questions. One thing I was thinking about, but again, because there's such a integration with customer processes, there is inevitably issues of security and data sharing and all that. How do companies deal with this? Do they see it as a big problem? Do you need specific toolbox to address these questions of customers, and also how can companies respond?
This is a super relevant question for the phase we're in right now. I'd asked it as well. I would say depends on the customer. If it's, I can share that the biggest customers of Asted are Nestle and Mondelez and such big companies that produce chocolate. They already have defined their corporate and GDPR and data security policies, and they would in most cases not allow them to be breached by any kind of data sharing from their side. On the other hand, smaller companies and the new entrants in the chocolate business might be more willing to share the data, because they both need the knowledge that Asted has, but they can see it helping them in the maintenance. And then I think there are a number of ways we can go about tackling those problems with especially big companies. I think one of them would be to have data security certificates issued or developed together in between the company and Asted. It could be collecting only the data points that they're comfortable with collecting, or it could be just having a local data processing at those companies so that they could share the data at their convenience. This would, of course, mean that we will not have timely access to the data that we would like in order to be able to make preventive maintenance and so on. But it will help us at least in the design of new generations of products to have that data and to know how the machines actually behave when we are not there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can pose the question and then let you answer on the others time. I'm in general interested. We want to have a general model that fits everyone. Yet we understand that each company, each product line is different, each supply chain is different. How do you balance that?
So starting with pilots, I would say, starting with the products that we know the most, us that has a super wide product portfolio. And we are starting exactly with the tempering machine that we sell the most volume-wise, but we also know the most about it. So we feel the most comfortable with this certain product. But then there is also a story behind selecting a different customer segment to sell different PSS types towards them, because smaller companies, smaller customers might not have the money to afford to buy a product. So for them, it would be financially appealing for us to finance a part of it. The larger companies with strict CSR policies and similar would go for it for PSS models, even though they're more expensive, just so that they can showcase they're more sustainable. And then there are different perspectives on how do we segment into bigger, smaller, and medium customers, and according to the needs they have for different types of product service system, whether product or user results oriented.
Wonderful. Thank you, Xana. Thank you, David. So now we'll hear from Marco Bertoni.
Hi, thank you, David. I think it was a great presentation. I'm quite familiar with your work by now because you've been part of a PSS course, and we have a chance to have, I was organizing this doctoral course, and we have a chance to have different supervision meetings, let's say, where we were talking with me about your research. I was giving my feedback, and I reviewed your report several times, so I ran out of questions. But still, you make a bold claim that you fix the problem of early stage design for process systems. So I want to investigate a little bit better if you really fixed the problem of early stage design. And I think I will start from a particular standpoint, which is the history of PSS. And I would like to ask you first, is that picture in the center of the screen AI generated or not?
No, this is actually a real place outside in Scotland.
I'm asking you because AI is very hyped right now. So we claim that we can fix everything with artificial intelligence. Yesterday I was at the awards here at Skylab, and we have quite a few students that claim that AI can basically make very good products and such. So AI is very hyped. Are you familiar with the concept of a hype cycle?
Yeah.
Basically, you have technology trigger when you have a peak of inflated expectations, and then I know the tension fades. Nobody talk about it for a while, and then actually is when things get interesting because you get into what the theory calls the plateau productivity. Do you think that PSS has entered that plateau productivity, or do you think that PSS is still an inflated concept or hyped concept? Because you mentioned that in the history you've seen a peak come some 10 years ago, then for some time it was quiet, and now it's ramping up again. It looks to me like it's following that pattern. But what do you think?
I think it's almost there. I think we've been through the disillusionment. I think we've been through the peak of inflated expectations in 2010, 11, 12, when it was all about servitization, and it was everywhere. And then it went down a little bit. And now with the rise of the circular economy, I think we are getting closer to it. But I wouldn't say we are there yet. And I wouldn't say that I solved the problem of it. I call it a generic process model. So it is an attempt to fix it. But I hope I bring it closer to that plateau of productivity. And I think what you say, AI and smart PSS might be the final element that will bring it there, and where it can live sustainably.
Oh, thank you. So I kind of agree with you. I remember being at Design Conference 2010, and a lot of papers had PSS or a title in the abstract somewhere. And then actually 8 years later, it just vanished. 2018, last time I was there, it was like me publishing a paper on the topic. So kind of, I think I kind of agree with your point of view. And so how do you I mean, what's the relationship, a little bit more, reflecting a little bit more in detail between product service systems and circular economy? I mean, you say that is an enabler. Is the only one? Are there more enablers? Is a good enabler? It has probably drawbacks. It has kind of advantages. A little bit more in detail, to what extent can PSS be linked to the circular economy discussion? And also related to the question before, can you sell PSS as an enabler for circular economy? Because I have a hard time to sell that right now.
Yeah, I can say that I would love every PSS that I design to contribute to circular economy, but not all of them will, just for the simple reason that the products that have been sold do not necessarily have to be taken back for it to still be a PSS. But if it was to be a circular economy, we would need to circulate the materials back. So in that sense, PSS can contribute to narrowing and extending product life and narrowing the resource use, as Nancy Bockner would put it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be closing the loop. So in that sense, we should strive for it to have the characteristics of the circular economy, but it doesn't have to be like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So now I would like to move a little bit more on the methodological part, because I mean, we've been using design resource methodology a lot. And I think the first question I want to ask you, did you cut corners in your research?
What would
No,
that?
I just want to know, did you cut corners? Do you feel really in your heart that you cut corners?
Definitely no.
No.
But it would be nice to have an example of what does it mean to cut a corner.
No, I think I will make the other example because in your design resource methodology picture, you have a lot of different tools I've been using, interviews, focus groups, etc., etc., etc. And on the other hand, maybe you haven't cut corners, but do you think that maybe some corners could have been cut in terms of data that you gather for different methods and tools that in the end of the day was not that useful, something that could have been left out in your research?
Mm-hmm. I think if I were to do it again, I would put even more emphasis on the empirical setting, because this is where we can get the most of the knowledge that has not already been covered in the literature, and that we could study more in depth and get new insights. And I think that's what's actually missing in the PSS literature, empirical research, empirically validated research in the industry. And so that's why I went in that direction. So I think producing yet another systematic literature review, even though I think it's the best thing for a PhD student to learn how to research, it might not be the biggest contribution to yet again systemize or have a descriptive study of how the field has evolved, because they are present in the literature and there are many of them. So the goal is not to create yet another tool and yet another review, but to actually move the science further. And for that reason, I think I would even more focus on the empirical setting, where there are all the new things that we can find and that they're not in the literature.
No, I think it's elaborate pretty well on this. I like that. So if you should have like in the future a PhD student working for you, which tool would you recommend for data gathering, and which tool you would say no, don't do this because this is not really value adding?
You mean the methods?
Yes, method-wise, yeah.
I quite liked to use action research. I think it's a very hands-on method, and where you have a chance to actually impact the object that you're studying, and not just stand and observe it, but also try to get input in the development phase of the tools, and then apply the tools, and then evaluate the tools. So I would definitely do more of that with the students and with myself if I had the opportunity to do more research.
Something you would leave out completely or partly?
That's
let's say that you have a lazy PhD student, right? You have experience of that, and you basically say, okay, do this, and this one don't even touch. Do you think there is something that you should not touch in terms of methodology that you can leave out?
Not really, I would say. I know it's a big pain to make a review and make a systematic one, but I think it's still the best way to learn and to get the overview of the knowledge. So even though if I would like to throw it out, I think it's for good that every PhD student, at least at our department with Tim and Daniela, does a systematic review to get a very good overview and to really be on top of all the knowledge that has been published in the topic.
Okay, so I switch gear a little bit. So yesterday, just an anecdote, I have a colleague sent to me a journal and said, I should publish on this journal. And this journal had very, very clearly written, we publish highly validated research. So do you think you can publish in that journal? Is this research highly validated? And what is missing if not?
I would always, as a researcher, say, I need more cases to test it.
Yeah.
I think it is validated to the extent of what I had time for in the 3 years. And to that, and to set that standard, it is highly validated. But for it to be really highly validated in the full sense of the word, I would want to do it with at least 10 manufacturing companies to be, instead of 3, to be completely sure that that is rock solid.
And when it comes to validation, do you see more tools that can come into play? So in the past, we did, we have been working with early stage design, etc., etc. One validation tool was, for instance, observations with people, and we did protocol analysis. So we put people to do a design session, recording them, taking transcripts and see what the pattern was. We did different types of things. So we did behavioral analysis and such. And you have a lot of tools, but these tools I have not seen. Do you feel that they could be useful? Protocol analysis and this type of approaches in order to know more about the effectiveness of the tool.
Yeah, I think I've used the observation methods, especially in the development of the screening tool, where I observed both students in the second phase of the development and practitioners in the industry use it, and then mark my observations and then try to see the steps that they did one by one. I think this is a great method to advance the tool further and get the new generation of the tool. But I think we should also be aware of a number of biases we might have as the observers that look at the process. Because we are familiar with the model and it is difficult to put ourselves in the shoes to see it from the first time and how actually practitioners use and interact the model. We can make the notes and make the photographs, but we are only interpreting it from our perspective and not exactly from the perspective of the practitioners. So although I think it is a good way of validating things, I think it should be combined with another method that can solidify this, the observations that we had.
Okay, you always good answers to everything.
That's good to hear.
Put you in a spot, I know. So let's touch upon the entire methodology. I'm trying to push a little bit of methodology because it has been quite a commodity for us to discuss it internally and externally. So this design research methodology, you have these 4 stages. But do you think that is a process that is sequential or very much iterative? I try to explain myself a little better. Do you think that it's something where you start with research clarification and then to descriptive fine-tuning? Or maybe something that should actually go very, very quickly and run it several times to provide better results. I can tell you that sometimes what we do is we do a very quick descriptive study. We come up with a very rough demo, like a very quick prototype for design support. We verify it and we come back again. We do more descriptive and we come up with a better demo. And we do a little bit more iterative approach. So some of PhD students, when we get to the PhD, we have run 4 times that kind of cycle. Do you feel, what would you see? I mean, I understand that you have done something that is pretty sequential. Can it help to have more iterations and to understand things better? And it is connected with the question also, what is the value of the prescriptive study as a way to gather more data about the problem?
So I think I've used the method iteratively through the 3 different cycles, even though the deliverable at the end of each cycle was separate and served only as an input in the next cycle. I think you have quite a good point in using the DRM sort of in a lean startup way, where we want to, as quickly as possible, reiterate through the different phases and improve the, let's call it, a minimum viable product as quickly as possible. And I think this is actually even more relevant in the empirical setting, where we quickly want to get some results and test them and get them to the customers as quick as possible. But then again, we are, through this kind of an approach, losing a bit of rigor if we are rushing everything. I know that in DRM, the Blessings and Chakrabarty's book, there are 6 or 7 different types of DRM sequences that we could use. And one of them is this quicker one and shorter one with a shorter descriptive study. The other ones have more comprehensive descriptive and prescriptive and then evaluative studies. It really depends which one do we see the most fitting for the kind of research that we do here. I would say if it's more empirical, it is better to have quicker phases, also because to keep the company that you're interacting with successful and engaged in your research, because it takes 2 years to get any results, the company might get tired of it. And then the follow-up question that you had was
the value of demonstrators in general, to get not to validate things, but to understand and learn about the present situation.
Yes. I think I've actually used this approach to develop the instantiation guidelines, because in the descriptive study, it was an empirical study to map through observation also all the actions that the companies did to instantiate the process, to map the challenges. But then in the prescriptive study, when we were developing those instantiation guidelines, we were at the same time evaluating the actions that we would put in the guidelines, because every action that the company would do to instantiate the process was thought through before they actually did it. So they internally would evaluate the different topics and themes before putting them into the final instantiation guidance. So you could say that it is both evaluation or descriptive 2 plus prescriptive happening concurrently at the same time.
Great. So I will have my last 3 minutes and 30 seconds for one question and a curiosity. So this system, this process, a generic process, and you illustrated it, taking as an example a company with a product trying to servitize it. Does it work also the other way, with a service-based company that tries to productify things? As an example, Snapchat, which is basically a service, some years ago, they tried to productify their service by launching the Snapchat Spectacles. It was basically a pair of glasses with 2 cameras to be used with Snapchat services. Do you think that this generic process applies also from service to PSS and not only from product to PSS?
That's a very good question. I think there are a number of also successful examples of productization where banks would their teller services replaced with an ATM and so on. I must say that I was not purposefully integrating this in the generic process model to go the other way around, but it would be a really good thing to try it out. So I cannot guarantee that it will be used, but I definitely think that the knowledge base that is contained in it would be of great help the other way around as well.
Okay, good. So the last thing, it's more like curiosity, because I saw in your first slide about your company, the company, that we have 480 patents, right? More or less 480, which is basically 5 patents per year they produce. Is this move towards PSS going to affect the way they see patents and the way they work with patents and the way they protect their intellectual property rights?
I think the answer to this question is very much related to what we were discussing before about data gathering and monitoring of the machine in production. So there might for sure come a moment in which we would need to patent the different solutions that we have for data monitoring, unless we pair up with another company who can do the monitoring service for us. And so I think in that sense, the IT infrastructure part could produce more patents, but I also think that through this data, we will learn more about how to do service and how to design product for the service, and then change the physical design of the product so that is more accessible to clean, that is more accessible to, apply the torque to the nut that we want to service. Because in a sense, we are then responsible, we are becoming the customers of our own products. We don't want to spend a lot of time on servicing them. So I think the patents might also go in that way to patent, the serviceable design of the machine.
Okay. I think this with patents, PSS is a word in itself. So I'm not an expert in patents, but we see some companies that are reacting to that. Some people are very scared, some people are very opportunistic, and some people are very happy about exploring opportunity. I see my time is out, basically in 10 seconds. So I leave the word to the next
Super, thank you. Thank you,
Marco. Tom, will you go next?
Yeah. So, firstly, really good presentation, great bit of work. When I read your thesis to begin with, I thought, this is 3 years. What was I doing for 3 years during my PhD? So yeah, quite remarkable. I was very surprised to see 3 DRM loops while being inside a company doing action research. So I guess my first question is, how extensively did you use ChatGPT to generate?
Don't ask.
I can answer.
I think what I'll do based on the previous question is try go a little bit into each one of your papers. So jumping into the first paper on the barriers and drivers, you took an approach to combine what you found as barriers and drivers in existing literature, and they compare it to what you found observed in your actual case. I'm just wondering why you chose to do that. Why not just do the literature or just do your case company?
So I first did the literature review study to get more familiar with the field, because I didn't have a PSS background coming in this PhD as well. And the second part is that I wanted to dive deeper and have an onboarding process in a company that can serve as a data gathering method for PSS and drivers and barriers. So I also used a number of interviews throughout the company, both to meet people who I knew I would need later on to ask questions, but also to gather their opinions on PSS after I've presented them with a short video presentation on what it is and what am I intending to do there.
Okay, very good. One of the outcomes of that paper was, I thought it was quite a neat separation between the different layers from strategic, tactical, and operational, showing how barriers and drivers are the opposite way around. You did notice that there were some barriers and drivers observed in the literature which were not observed in your case, and some which were observed in your case but not observed in literature. You didn't really spend that much time focusing on those kind of outliers in your paper. I was just wondering, was it irrelevant that some existed and some didn't in each side?
Yeah, I think it was mostly the way that I found new interesting operational barriers in the company, because I had an opportunity to just dive deeper into what people were thinking. And then examples of those are how do we examine, how do we study, how long do our wear and tear parts last in a product? I could not find anything about it in the literature, but it was a super big discussion in the company to actually know how do we time the service periods towards the customers. And after 6 months, this has to be changed. After three years, this has to be changed. So this was definitely one of them. Then the other would be that we were also asked in the process of standardizing the product portfolio, but we've never thought about standardizing the service portfolio. This is also going to be one of my tasks now at the company, to exactly define what does each service option contain and how does it relate to all the different service options that we have, so that we know that every time we offer a certain service options, we have to offer it in a bundle with another service because they work together in delivering more value, or just because it will save us cost if we group them together.
That really surprises me, the example you gave there that wasn't existing in literature. And I think particularly with things like predictive maintenance and the links to reliability, lifetime of product, I can't really believe that wasn't existing in literature. To what extent do you think it was just a categorization issue?
I think it was the PSS literature that I was looking into. If I were to look in a predictive, preventive, or condition-based maintenance literature, so deeper into this one service option of a PSS that is maintenance, I would for sure have found it. But this was a literature review for the barriers. It was not a systematic one.
Yeah.
So that's why it wasn't there. That's why I probably.
In your research questions related to this, you used quite an interesting phrase, which was, what are the real world perceived drivers and barriers? So I'm just wondering, what do you mean by real world?
I meant the empirical ones perceived at the company when I do interviews and conversations with the people in the company, because I think they might be distinct from what the ones that people read in literature, because literature is built on top of the literature, and papers are written without interacting with the real world in many of the cases. Maybe it was not the best formulation. I might have said empirical as well here.
Okay, because that surprised. I didn't really. It could have been quite nice for you to have. Maybe it was in the descriptive statistics, which I didn't notice, but in your literature study to show how many empirical studies there were, because it surprises me that I would have thought, and I've seen a lot of the PSS publications, at least from this institution, they're nearly all empirically based. So I'm just because you're reading it, does it necessarily mean it's not real world? I mean, now that I'm reading your thesis, is it no longer real world?
Yeah, I completely agree. But I would, in my perspective, they are not actually the most of the publications that I've read, and I've extensively read through the systematic literature review. They have not been empirically based in their majority, I would say.
Well, that really is a problem, and I understand the answer to your previous question. Okay, moving on to paper 2. I like the idea of the general process model, and actually it took a while for me to click exactly where it fits in, how all the different segments work together, but I get it now. Why is it you thought because you're focused in, and I like the fact that you're not just manufacturing, but it's capital goods manufacturing, so you're contextualizing your research really well. But why do we need a general process when you're embedding it into a specific sort of sector, which has some unique characteristics? I guess that's why you mention it, because you say it's slightly different to normal manufacturing and then other industries. So why do we need a generic process for something specific?
I would say it's generic for the capital goods manufacturing companies, and capital goods manufacturing companies can operate in many different industries. Just for the 3 companies that I had, it was medical, HVAC, and it was food processing equipment. and they all have their own peculiarities and matters and entities that where they should put more focus on, as I have explained also in the instantiation paper. So in that sense, that it bridges different industries, and that you can use the same model to develop different types of drug service systems, whether they're product use or result oriented. So that can be generically applied across the spectrum of those.
And when you compared it to the generic process models outside of PSS in engineering, you sort of use Powell and Bytes as the sort of benchmark and said it's replacing the analysis of task and conceptual design phase. So to what extent are you replacing the thing you're proposing? Are you replacing all of the process models that they now have with regards to new product and service or new business development? Or does it fit in alongside the engineering design process? If they have an agile process, does it integrate with it? Or do you have to say, everything you do in this phase now, you get rid of and you put my generic process in?
I think it is a combination. I think the GPM from my thesis should be looked as the overall frame. But then again, when we design a product within the product service system, we could as well use Powell and Bytes as well to arrive at a concept or embodiment of detailed design of a product that will then contribute to the whole of PSS. You could also say that this kind of a model, it has a very wide design objects. So it essentially also means that by following this process model to design PSS, you're also designing the how the company will work as a whole when you actually deliver this offering in the market. I hope that answers.
Would you go as bold? If we were to start up a new company now in capital goods sector, would you say that this should be the starting point for their process? I mean, is this how we should work?
I would use it. Yes, I would use it because it has all the relevant considerations. First, to the business model, which I think has the biggest impact later on the products and the functions that will live in this business model, and then slowly moves towards the more physical and practical definition of the different options, the infrastructure and the network and the physical architecture of a project at the end. So I think the 7 main clusters encompass the seven main things you should think about when you would start as well.
And actually, I'd have to say I agree. I didn't see anything when we introduce something new. Maybe we pick something out and lose something, but when I looked at the framework, I didn't see anything that was missing from it that I would consider important. So, with regards to these 7 dimensions, you didn't seem to systematize those or put them sequentially. Are they supposed to be done completely in parallel? So you had your stage gate along the top, and then you deal with your 7 dimensions within each stage.
Yeah, I would say they do not have to be parallel. We could say that if we have an example in which we have phase 1, we are selecting the partners, we're selecting the active network. In the phase 1, we're also thinking about the function.
Would you want to bring it up on the screen? So we maybe people can. I think it was in the presenter.
So if we were to select some actors here, we would still not log them in before we decide what functions should they contribute to the whole concept. So then you can say that locking in of this one does not have to coincide perfectly with locking of this one, because we would first need to select the options of the partners to know who to work with. Then we would define the functions here, and only then will we pair the two, and then perhaps somewhere here decide which partner in the network will deliver this part of the function. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that is on this line here happens at the same point in this line here, right? Analytical.
I did get the feeling though that there are some there is some sequence of order or nesting within these dimensions. So I think you'd want to understand your value proposition before you're designing the functions and so on.
Yeah.
So
So I would say that, is there a question?
you could reflect on it.
And I would say that also I described it in the paper to have a simplified model on what things should be focused first. I think in the first phase, it's the most important to focus on those two. Of course, you have to think about them, but the main majority of work is focused here. Then the second phase is the yellow and the blue one. You really want to get the requirements from all the network actors in the triple bottom line requirements, and then define what are the functional requirements here. And only when we know those things, then in the last phase can we focus more on those three last one, because we know the functions that we want to deliver, so we can take the different products and service options and put them together so that they can actually fulfill what we've said here.
In the stage one of the functions, so in the strategic planning on the function, did I understand correct that you define that by the functional unit of what the PSS is delivering?
I would say we define a functional unit in the second phase, but you would of course need to start thinking about what is the function in general that you want to deliver, so that you can later on detail it further. So a function, of course, of a chocolate tempering machine is to cool down the chocolate to produce a crystal structure that you want and to have it controlled and so on. But the machine has to have a number of different functions. It has to have a function that you can work on it on HMI. It has to have a function, as I mentioned, of a night mode that it saves energy when you're not using it. It has to have a number of different functions, and they should all be considered here. But a functional unit, the main thing to which is the bottom line to compare all the different solutions, that one would be defined and selected here.
That seems counterintuitive to me. I would have thought you would start with the functional unit, and then there are a whole bunch of optional sub-functions to it. So the one you gave an example of about the nighttime mode.
Yeah.
Well, that's one potential sub-function that can help achieve a functional unit of delivering tempering at this amount of energy consumption with this amount of time.
But I would say this is a separate function that does not directly influence the main function. The customer or the machine does not care if there is a night mode. It can still deliver the main function that it is made for. So some functions are sub-functions of the functional unit, and others are separate. They all have to be designed. So we
Stuff. Solid. Okay. Didn't in your business model function dimension here, you did two things, which at least you listed two things. One is evaluation of the market size, which is not so much the business model, it's assessing the market, the kind of business potential, and the other was on the value proposition.
Yeah.
These seem to be two quite different activities, and it seemed to me the value proposition is more closely related to things like the offerings and function than it is to the overall market size. So
I would say that within a cluster, there are a number of different entities living under the same umbrella, and I wanted to keep them as few as possible. And I think 7 is a good number, but I could have had hundreds of them if I were to double click and open up all of them. But I would say that the value proposition is the most important thing with respect to the business model to define at the beginning, and also with using a business model canvas or value proposition canvas or tools like that to, in the beginning, have an idea on what is it that we are giving to the customer, so that we can later on specify it with the function, with the product. Because I would say that if you would take a value proposition in all its richness, how is it presented to the customer, and shake it off, then you will get a function of what it really is, what we're really delivering.
Got maybe a little bit of time to ask a question on paper 3 on the implementation for you have an action research sort of method to your work. And then you give this kind of instantiation plan. And it ends with a champion. But I'm just wondering, in your case, how much is this skewed by the fact your process already had a champion and it was you? And in the future, this process doesn't have you in at the start. And therefore, should the champion be at the end or should the champion be at the beginning?
That's a very good point. I think it's in the instantiation guidelines, it is also not necessary that we view all the topics chronologically. It is all the topics that we should consider in it. I definitely think it's skewed with me being defined at the beginning, but I also found some similar examples where we establish a process owner at the end of the process. For example, in Tucker and Tishner, the early literature in 2006, they would also have this kind of a formulation of having a PSS champion that is actually then also running after this phase when we went into embodiment and detailed design and operationalizing it later after the concept.
Oh, okay, I'm going to squeeze one more in there. You did so well. Paper 4, you have 6 success criteria. For some reason, you only mentioned 2 of those criteria in the research question, which led me to wonder whether 4 of them were not as important or sub-criteria. And then I also noticed that the success criteria are all kind of perceptual. They're about how people perceive the value to be. So you chose to go on kind of second-hand interpretations of how valuable it is, rather than measuring whether this process led to a product with better PSS characteristics or with better environmental characteristics. So why did you choose?
I think the judgment of value is always to some extent subjective. And especially in the early stages, it is quite difficult to put a number on value beyond comparison. Again, the comparison of perceived benefits over perceived cost that the customer can see, because the customers would not perceive costs, the financial cost, in the same way as environmental cost. They would probably in reality weigh the financial cost more, and I don't want that. I want all of them to be valued at the level they should be valued at, almost equally. But the reality is that if there is not a business case, then the perceived value will be much lower, even though it might be the best environmentally friendly PSS that you can ever make.
I'll wait to come back on that.
All right, thank you, Tom. Thank you, David. So that's the end of our first round of questions. Now we move to the second round. Oksana, will you start us off with 10 minutes?
Yep, absolutely. We'll start with paper 3, since it's not yet published, submitted, probably in review. And it's about evaluation of your generic process model. And the first question is that you take the capital goods companies and you test from different sectors within that sector, but you choose companies based on size and based on the line of product. What other, if we look a little bit into the future, what other companies would you need to test this model to really see, whether it stands the proof of different or the different sectors, different type of products, different maybe also balance of product intensity versus service intensity in PSS?
So I think there is a number of criteria here. The first one, for example, being having or not having, or to what extent does the company have experience with PSS before? I want to test it with companies that have never done it before and that also have experience with it before, and try to integrate it with how they do work, or how they never did the work and now they will do it with this kind of a model. Then I would also like to test it outside of Scandinavia, because here in Scandinavia, we're quite aware of the environmental repercussions, and outside of it, it might be valued at a much lower level to have an environmentally friendly PSS than it is here. So it's definitely also outside of this market. Then it's different industries. I mean, as I said, it's medical, and that can be a tough one because of all the regulations and legislative. But I would definitely go and try into automotive, into mobility, because here you can have a really big impact. But I will also have into energy machines, so meaning heat pumps, renewables, so solar panels, heating systems, because this is really where we can make an impact in every household, and then also contribute to sustainable energy production, which is even better if we could at least have heat pumps, panels, have an ESCO model, so that they just pay, what they are spending and similar. And yeah, I think there are a number of other criteria that I would like to test it in. Of course, some companies are more suited to, some industries are more suited to have product-oriented PSS, others for use. For others, result-oriented would not make sense. So I would really like to test it in those 3 different categories.
Then you had a very nice. I really enjoyed most of the structured way of how you tested, and the fact that you did have 3 different companies, and that the companies were willing to disclose, the difficulties, the challenges that they faced with it. So how, if you go back to the extent, can you explain the extent of the implementation of the PSS in different companies? Did they work with one, say, product line or product, or one worked with one product, another one wanted to have a complete turnover of the entire company? So that helps to also understand the evaluation feedback.
So in the 2 companies, Asted and 3Shape, that is the food processing and medical, we had a certain product that we were focused on. It was either a tempering machine or a dental scanner, to scan your teeth. And the 3rd company, that was Danfoss, and in there we were more looking into how can they incubate different product system models in their department that was dealing with new ventures. So they have been trying it on different projects to put PSS into different projects and try to develop it with instantiated model and see how it works. Unfortunately, this one has started May or June this year, and they usually take 6 months to do this kind of incubation. So I do not have results from those, but I can tell you that from the example of the medical industry as well, this kind of a process has been implemented into Power BI, where they could see exactly what I was talking about, having sort of dynamic capabilities where different parts of the company, different departments and different responsible individuals could see just the tasks and inputs and outputs that they are responsible for, not to confuse every overburden every member with the whole process model, but just with the things that they need to do, and then who should they meet after they do it with. So also defining this communication structure in the flow.
Linked to this, do you need them? You call it pioneer or champion, but do you need this someone spider in the web who keeps track of all the departments and ensures the communication lines between? So, and also see the bigger picture.
I mean, this kind of a person would for sure be a bottleneck to chase all the people around. But until the people are used to using this kind of model and repeatedly using it, I think this is absolutely necessary to have someone supporting all functions and just making them aware this is who you should output the knowledge to in the next department. They will do this with it and then go further, because at the end of the day, it is a complicated process that people have to follow, and with complexity come the confusion and the slowness of on executing it.
I like your instantiation challenges, and one of them is that it's a lengthy process and it's difficult to judge if the project is going well before it reaches the end. I was puzzled and disheartened with this, because how do you sell that one to management? Give me, the buck, and maybe I'll show you the result, and maybe not. How do you, what to do about it?
I would compare it to an R&D process, which is researching something completely new.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be sure that it's going to go well, but you nevertheless invest money in it in hope that you will have some competitive advantage if it goes out in the right way. So not all research is successful, of course, but all research has results, good or bad.
Right. Yeah, you can always say we can learn from our mistakes. Also, I was thinking in terms of timing, because this your PhD is about first 2 stages of the design process that takes so much time, and then there are 2 more. So, what can you give me? What examples have you seen in industry? How long it may take the first 2 stages and potentially the next 2?
Yeah. So if we were to design a new product, not a periodic service system, in a manufacturing company such as us, that it could take 5 years from scratch from R&D and to do everything. And if you think that product service system is way beyond that, it will take even more years. But of course, if we build up on the existing product and do not do the whole research and development for the product, or just alter it so that it fits into PSS, it could be a few years. It could be a few years to have this detailed embodiment design.
All right, then I have a last question, which goes back to away from the actual subject, but more into how do you see, what is the definition of your PhD success? Academically, in application, for specific industry?
I think it's 2 things. I think it's to advance knowledge in academia, especially contributing to the circular economy. But I think it's also to advance the adoption of industry-ready tools that I produced with the instantiation guidelines and the best and the generic process model. And so I think it is twofold, but it is also that those tools that I produced, that they are both usable, but that they're useful, so that they're actually covering the gap that I identified in literature, but that they have some extent of ease of use, so they can actually be adopted in the industry, with a hope that they would stick like a stage gate model and be there with us for 20+ years.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Oksana. Michael, will you go next?
Yes, absolutely. So I was thinking a little bit about the process, and then I want to ask you about course selection. First of all, in the middle of the pictures here, you have this IDEF 0 kind of structure, right? Why? Why did you use IDEF 0? That's all like me, more or less, even older than me.
Yeah, so even in the generic version of the model, I wanted to have something that's familiar in the industry. And I've seen IDF 0 used in industry countless times for any kind of business model processing, but also in IT, where we have this kind of rational unified process of all the different activities. So I wanted to have the generic process model on a theoretical level, but that people from the industry can also resonate and see something familiar with it. It is that, but it is also that I found it in the literature, especially in the early one, 2009, or Mausson, the French researchers have extensively used the IDF 0 to map different steps in the design processes as well.
I mean, this is music for my ears, because we have a course in the enterprise modeling, and I push IDEF 0 a lot, and everybody's like, yeah, but this is old. But actually, this is very, very well established, understood. The only comment I have is you call the arrow from the top constraints. Is that called controls? You know.
So I'm actually citing the standard, the ISO 30123 standard.
I check the internet. I mean, the internet is like, and I'm pretty sure it's set control. But I was curious, where did you find constraints?
Yeah, I'm quite sure I found it at the same project. But it is basically the same. No matter the word used for it, it is used to represent the same thing. What is it that can prevent the execution of this action in the box? So no matter that is if it's called constraint or control, in my model, it made more sense to call it constraint because I was exactly talking about things that will prevent thesis from executing them, but not so much having a control in the sense of supervising every step of the way in some sort of a way.
Yeah, but I cannot sense that, and I was thinking if the model also wants to give an indication who is responsible, the person inside the organization to do something or not. Seems like you are not indicating a person or a particular role. And why don't you indicate a role? Typically, when you have a to-do list, you always have a person, otherwise nobody's doing nothing. You put an action on the board and like everybody's trying away. Why don't you want to pinpoint the person controlling that particular aspect?
I specifically wanted to avoid this. I wanted to avoid this because it would make it less generic. Because every company has a little bit different structure and different responsibilities within the companies and departments, and then prescribing that some department should do something or some person should do something would really constrain the generic part of this model, and then practitioners would feel compelled to use it in that way, where in fact it is with instantiation guidelines, it is meant to adjust it to exactly the context that you have and specifying the responsible or control person responsible for any given part of the model or tasks there.
Let's say that I don't find that super convincing, but I can live with that because I think in the end of the day, if you start from scratch, you want to become a PSS provider and you don't know who is responsible for what or who should do what, it could be useful to give an indication of the responsibility lies in this organization or this role.
But if I might say, you will determine who is responsible for that in the design process, but the design process itself should not have responsibilities on who should do design of this certain part. When we do the design as practitioners who are following this process, of course, we will say who is responsible in the network to do this kind of a function. But when we are adopting the model and designing the model, I don't want to say at the outset that Marco from sales should do that, or that sales should do it at all, because it might be a different organizational structure and it might be different allocation of responsibility in that company. So another person should perhaps do it.
So that's a way to make it generic in a way, not specific. Okay, yeah, I can buy that. And a more generic question is, I mean, you have a lot of documentation below and a lot of boxes. How much does all this information overload the mind of the designer, blocking their creativity? I mean, because we experience with the students, when we give them to do like a design sprint with basically zero material, they come up with crazy ideas. When we oblige them to fill all the forms, go through the process, fill all the different boxes in Excel matrix, they come up with very incremental ideas because they put all their mind into trying to fill the forms, to follow the rules, and then think out of the box. So how do you observe this phenomenon, or are you afraid of that phenomenon? Of overloading the mind of the engineers and basically making them to do incremental work instead of radical work?
I would say a little bit afraid. I'm aware that this kind of a thing can happen, but I think it looks back to the question that you asked before about having fast cycles versus slower and more detailed cycles. I think when they instantiate the model, they will only keep the things that they are necessary for them, not to overburden them, not to overload them. But the idea of this model is both to have the steps, but also the reference model that contains all the knowledge that you might need in the design process. And you can choose, of course, whether you need this or this box when you instantiate it to your model. So for a person that is instantiating it, it's definitely overburdening, and that's what we saw in the feedback as well. There's a lot of stuff to comprehend, and it takes time. It takes time to get used to it. And then coming back to having a champion at the beginning, maybe it should really be at the beginning, because this champion can then introduce the model at the beginning and get it closer to the practitioner and explain how does it work, and then you can choose the things that you need for your specific case.
Okay, and very last question from my end. So you have this model that goes until PSS concept development, and I'm actually thinking a little bit PSS concept selection. So in concept development, I guess we come up with different ideas and different scenarios, different ways to design a PSS. How do you do concept selection? So you have a box following this process. And inside the box, how much did you look into literature or in multi-criteria decision making? Because there are at least 60 different tools to do multi-criteria analysis. You can use fuzzy, you can use non-fuzzy, gray analysis. So you can do a lot of very crazy stuff. And if you look at PSS literature, people are proposing a lot of very exotic ways to select the PSS. So did you look into that literature? And was it useful or not to look into that literature?
I think it was. I've scratched the surface of analytical network processing, hierarchy processing. But I didn't really find it suitable for this kind of early stages of design, because you are compelled to assign some numerical values to things, to specific parts of the concept, and you cannot really be sure how do you value them in respect to each other, because it is qualitative and a fuzzy process and qualitative information that is really difficult to put a number on. And that's why I kept it at a qualitative level with the best Q. But I think what is also needed to progress this screening research further is, well, I have this cube now, and it describes a concept with 36 or 72 data points, however you want to look at it. But it is pivotal in the further stages of research to actually see how are those different dice interacting with each other, so that we can make some sort of trade-offs. Because now we have a set of information that is describing the concept from different angles, but what does it mean altogether? It's left for the interpretation at the end.
Okay, very good. I think we could be very good friends about this discussion on concept selection. And good that you mentioned trade-offs, because that makes you a reductionist. But I leave the word to discuss more about the.
Thank you, Marco. Do you have any final questions?
You're in industry now, so you're taking the academic knowledge you learned to go and really put it into industry, not just as a on-the-side researcher, but doing it as full time. So I guess it's a last opportunity for you for at least a while to ask some more academic questions. Very high level. You put a quote at the very beginning of your thesis. Sustainable manufacturing is an oxymoron, by the founder of Patagonia.
Yeah.
Is it still an oxymoron, and to what extent do you deal with this oxymoron?
I hope it's a little bit less than a little bit less of an oxymoron, but I still think that it will, of course, never be sustainable as long as we fully sustainable, as long as we produce goods and extract raw materials and build things. It can only be more sustainable, and we can do quite a good job with PSS and within the circular economy to loop it back and keep the products in loop at higher value levels for as long as we can. But as long as we manufacture, we are taking things from the earth, and they're hardly coming back.
You really think it could never So they should give up on their net zero targets.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, but there are other ways that we could do that, perhaps with biochar or.
Okay. Can you go back to the slide on your research questions?
Sure.
I had a little bit of a problem with these research questions in the way that you stacked them. So could you try and explain to me your thinking around how the sub questions relate to the overall main questions? Just in
Maybe
general,
open it up so we can see all the gray ones.
I can just about read them. Okay.
Okay.
You know, is it that if you answer all of the sub questions, then the main one is answered? Is that-
Not automatically. I think all the sub answers have to be merged and then a little bit tweaked at the end to get the final answer to the overall research question. I can give an example in this second one. So we are first doing the way descriptive study where we are studying what exists, and then we go a little bit deeper to see what are actually the phases that others use, what are the activities that they use, tools that they use, and then what kind of sustainability considerations do they make. And all of these questions emerged as I was trying to answer the main one. But then when I put them all together, that's when you get the generic process model and answer the full question. So if I left them at the level of, okay, these are the phases, these are the considerations, and I didn't put them together, it wouldn't answer the question how to systemize everything and put it in one model.
Okay. Let's take that one, for example, research question 2. You don't mention sustainability in the main research question, but you mentioned sustainability in 2.3.
Yeah,
Which, and then it opens the question of why don't you have 2.5, which is about quality?
Yeah, I think it's when I did my literature search, I searched for all the process models and all the different processes that can help us develop PSS, and not all of them are within the scope of sustainability. So this research question was formulated in a way to get a wider search and get the methods that are also not purposely designed to design sustainable PSS, so that I would capture as wide as possible knowledge base and then be able to later on distill from each of those methods what are the sustainability considerations that they use so that I could instill them in. Because if I were to search for sustainability with the word sustainability up there in my search process on Scopus on Web of Science, I would get 20, not 96 methods, and that wouldn't have been as comprehensive as it has been now doing it this way.
Okay, so there is maybe some more thought between the lines that helped you create the next question. Yeah. Okay, I think just from a sort of research communication rigor point of view, it does help if these things stack up in a more logical sequence, or at least the result of one leads to the question of the next or something, and I couldn't see quite how those piece together. The other one I had a little bit of a concern about was your hypothesis. And a hypothesis is used it's quite a specific term in scientific studies and work. Do you know what, in your view, what's the purpose of a hypothesis?
To test it. The purpose is to see, to formulate how would we like it to, or how do we think it works, and then to be actually able to test it whether it's true, and then either prove or disprove the hypothesis based on the research.
Yeah, and I think it's more often used for experimental style research, something that you can disprove or prove in some way. So when you write a hypothesis where you use the words PSS for sustainability can provide useful and usable support.
I think that
Can, but you know, there is a heck of a lot of wiggle room in that hypothesis. So I think it's a fine statement, but I think from a scientific point of view, it's I'll be carefully using.
I think it's the biggest culprit of design research in a broader sense, because I could never claim in its full totality that it has been 100% proved, and because there are always some exceptions and special cases that might disprove it. I mean, this is again the definition of hypothesis, but I think that is the nature of design research and research into design.
And I guess that's why we often just use research questions and only use a hypothesis if we are doing an experiment. And I don't think you would have lost any information or knowledge here if you just didn't state a hypothesis. But it's just a very pedantic thing. I needed to find something that I could critically. Other than that, it's completely bulletproof. If you're I'll have to ask the wrap-up question now. Typical one is if you're to do it again, but maybe we can ask if you are to sort of co-supervise a PhD project from the industry side in the future. Is there anything you do to do that sort of supervision process more efficiently from the company side? And is there any sort of things you bring along the journey that might help frame them?
I think it's a thin line in balancing the amount of workload that is spent practically in the company and within research. And I think that really speaks to this question of having fast loops, learning something theoretically, then straight away applying it, and then writing a paper about it. So I think it's crucial to strike this kind of a balance between what we get in the industry and what we get in academia. And if I were to do it again, I would, as I said in the question before, also focus more on this empirical part, but I would focus on it in a way that just in a way that we test already existing tools in the literature and straight away start using them in the company, because it will be a much bigger learning much sooner than waiting until the researcher develops its own tool to test it. I think we can push it way more faster in the company if we just stand on the shoulders of what is already existing and then learning on top of that. And that is also what's missing in the literature, to test and validate some of the methods, and then we will also cover that part of it. But it is really about, as I said, standing on the shoulders of the previous researchers and then learning through that without necessarily reinventing new tools and new methods and tools, because I think we have plenty in this field.
Some better work.
Good. Thank you, Tom. So this concludes the examination round by the examination committee. Thank you, gentlemen, and Oksana for that. We move on to the supervisors, and maybe we start with you, Tim, as the primary supervisor. Do you have questions and comments for David?
I may have a comment and two questions.
One of you.
All right. So the comment being many thanks to you, David, for a wonderful presentation in defence thus far, and the whole PhD activity and project has been really wonderful, and we'll say more about that later. But I think what was really nice in the questioning round here is that you had lots of ideas about how to test the model in practice, all the way from, not surprisingly, heat pumps and solar panels to all sorts of other things. So I'm going to keep an office open for you in case you want to come back at some stage and do the further testing of all those ideas. But when we look at in our group, we've been discerning between a product service system and servitization relatively strongly, probably stronger than more others, maybe pedantically or pragmatically saying that product service system is the object of the design and it's the process for the design of product service systems. It's also the outcome, whereas servitization is the movement, it's the transition the more management and change management oriented activities. That's at least how we've delimited the two, and that somehow has covered your thesis and your project, but also the way in which you answered the questions today. If you were to imagine that we would have had a servitization PhD student, maybe from CBS or somewhere else, or from a change management perspective, who came in halfway through your PhD, so they were just ready to take your generic process model and start to run with it, what would they have done from a servitization perspective that you left out? And how would we benefit from that PhD, if we did have that one, to really make sure that we fulfill the dream that you really have, is to get these things out into industry and get the research off out of the papers and into the companies? What would they do?
Yeah, I think this servitization track, of course, is highly intertwined with the PSS design track. And if there was a student from CBS dealing only with it, I think this person would mainly deal with this aspect of the model in which we define how do we actually assign those responsibilities, and this one, how do we organize ourselves internally? How do we do the organizational transformation for us to be able to receive the PSS design model, then at the end of the day, operate it in the end. So I think this person would be more into, even you could say, anthropological study of how people behave and how people communicate in between themselves when they do PSS design process, and how do we then structure the whole organization? Do we split it in two and have a service business separately, or do we stay under the same roof? And then how do we then not cannibalize on product sales with service sales and vice versa? So those could be maybe the relevant problems to study.
And your recommendations to the future, if we were to do another PhD like this in the future, in terms of combining the two from the get-go, what would you say we should do differently, or how do we enhance the process?
From a methodological perspective, or
For example,
from I think I've already answered a similar question 2 times. I would definitely go with more action research. I would definitely go with more hands-on empirical study, because I think that's where the gold nuggets are in the company. But I would also try to, if I had two students, one servitization, one in PSS, make the parallel processes and see how this interaction goes in between organizational transformation. How do we then transform the organization if we implement this process model, and vice versa? I hope this answers.
That's fine. Yeah. And then that was my first question in 2 parts. The second question is more about teaching. So I am a cheaper. So you've been a big part of our PSS course here at DTU 2 years in a row, and actually your models and your tools are being used. The method, some of the methods are being used, but we don't have a generic process model element in the course. Should we totally change our PSS course to adopt your generic process model? And if so, how and where does it fall short?
It's a very nice course to start with. What I think, as we also discussed, that the process model could be seen as a frame of the curriculum for the teaching course, where we could have different tracks and then different tools corresponding to different clusters, and where we would basically have a lecture on business model, then on network, and then on requirements. And then at the end of the course, well, you've been through the process and you've designed a PSS concept, and I think it will provide a very good structure there. But now I know it has been used this year as just one of the tools in the model. I think it is also quite valuable for the students to see how are all the tools that they have been studying throughout the year, the MICA analysis, the ecosystem map, and the user activity cycles, and all the other tools that they have been using so far. How do they actually connect with each other when you're trying to design a product? So it is really putting a frame on how does it all fit together, I would say.
Great, thank you for the questions and kind words, Tim. Daniela, will you have some questions for David?
I have only one. You must be tired of having questions at this point. But you know, over the past 3 years, you've been really flourishing, having one feet in industry and one feet in academia. And I think that you are a really good example of how to do that actually, because it's not easy. And you managed to manage the two kind of stakeholder groups in a really good way. So well done for that. But you will now have both of your feet in industry. But wanting that or not, academia has become part of who you are. And it's not only because of your PhD title, but academia, I would dare to say, knowing you from the past 3 years, I think it has changed who you are, the way you think, the way you communicate your ideas, but also the way that you take action. So my question to you is, how will that influence your work in industry from now onwards?
I think it's going to be way more systematic than it would have been 3 years ago. And way more structured in a sense that I really want to plan and foresee the consequences of the actions that I will take. So it, in a sense, might slow down the decision process as well that I would have on an operational level, but also will give me an immense quality of having always looking at a bigger picture. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons my supervisors taught me, to always step back and look at it. How is it from this perspective, and how is it from this one? So I really think that I can have a discussion with myself then from different perspectives and see what will work the best in practice.
Super. I did not receive any questions from the physical audience here or online. So this then actually concludes the questions for you for today, David, and for your defense. So the further procedure is as follows. The evaluation committee, under the guidance of our chairman of the examination committee, Professor Tom Howard, will draw up a final recommendation for David today. Then the chairman, Tom, will submit this recommendation to the committee of the PhD program of Civil Engineering, Management Engineering, Mechanical Engineering, and Wind Energy here at DTU. This committee then will examine this committee's recommendation. And finally, the dean, on behalf of the academic council, will award the degree. With this, I close David's PhD defense. The evaluation committee will go into a separate meeting room now to draw up their conclusion. You're all welcome to wait here in this room with David. And when the evaluation committee is finished, they will come back to this room and will present David with their feedback and results. So you're welcome to wait here for that. Thank you, David, for a really nice presentation. Thank you, committee and supervisors, for your questions. Thank you, colleagues, family, and friends who are here to support David and who have supported him during his journey. I hope you all stay safe and have a wonderful evening. Thank you and goodbye.